The challenge I had to face today is to give a lecture on acute heart failure, but to show you how devices and how to well use the devices are important in acute heart failure. Those are more conflict. Then I would do what I usually do recently is my first slide will be also my last slide. Then it's easy maybe to follow. And I will show you that in patients with acute heart failure, we should separate between those who are hemodynamically stable, then in those, meaning with blood pressure being normal or high. Then in those patients, acute heart failure is related to congestion. And here, the device that should be used to understand the physiology and the status of the patient is echo. And I will show you some interesting recent data with that. However, in patients with acute heart failure, but in stable hemodynamics, then we are combining here congestion and hyperperfusion. Then we will do echo first. But if the patient is unresponsive to therapy and those are recommendations from European societies and international societies, if there is a severe right ventricular dysfunction, we need to put a pulmonary artery catheter. As you may know, I participated to the last guidelines of heart failure, the 2021 guidelines. Now, those guidelines are indeed important. They are the most recent one, but also because I pushed a lot to renew the definition and have a contemporary definition of heart failure. And if you go now to Wikipedia, or if you look on the former definition, it is written that heart failure is related to a decrease in cardiac output, and we all know today is not true. And this is reason why now it's written that heart failure is a structural and functional abnormality of the heart that results, and this is very important, in elevated intracardiac pressure. This is heart failure. Heart failure is congestion. It's elevated intracardiac pressure. And indeed, when we are in a late scenario, we have a low cardiac output, but first we have an elevated intracardiac pressure. And the other thing we also did is to show that there's a new classification with reduced, mildly reduced, and preserved. But the mildly reduced can come either from a reduced that is improved or from a preserved that is deteriorating. And I think this is important. The other paper I'd like to mention is a paper I participated to on imaging, non-invasive imaging as a cornerstone of cardiovascular precision medicine. I think this paper is interesting because as you see here, you have the heart, but it tells you what imaging is doing. Imaging, we use it a lot to establish a diagnosis, but more and more, we will use it much earlier to have a very early signs of a disease. And indeed, when we have some imaging done early, this imaging, if it's done before treatment, it's important to have baseline. Why? Because we'll follow the benefit of therapy, and this is very important. I think this figure shows you how we can use imaging and how we can have a personalized treatment. For acute heart failure, what we learned from the very recent guidelines is indeed the patient comes, he's dyspneic. We will quickly ask for a patient history, look for signs and symptoms. And in this red square, you see what should be done within the first minutes or the first hour. ECG, pulse oximetry, echocardiography, lab test, chest X-ray. And here, for the first time in ESC guidelines, for the first time, we put lung ultrasound. Now, I am ready to do a bet with you guys. Here, you see that lung ultrasound is at the end of the list, but you will see in the coming year, because there are data that are coming out and trials even coming out using lung ultrasound, you will see that lung ultrasound will go slowly up, and maybe one day, because you can do it very quickly, and the physician in charge can do it very quickly, you will see that it will take more and more importance in the following year for management of acute heart failure. Now, interestingly, we have all those exams, and indeed, you know that since many, many years, and during the discussion, you will tell me how we are with natriuretic peptide in Turkey, but natriuretic peptide is increasingly used all around the world. Depending on the country, some countries are not using it so much, some others are using it a lot, but it's a very, very important parameter as an add-on on the clinical parameters. And if BNP is low, we can rule out the diagnosis of acute heart failure. If it's high, we can confirm acute heart failure. Now, when the diagnosis is done, we need to look on the blood pressure of the patient. If the blood pressure is normal, there is no hyperperfusion, then we go for loop diuretics to relieve congestion. However, if in addition of congestion we have a hyperperfusion, then we will have loop diuretics and And the treatment of acute heart failure is even reduced compared to the former guidelines, because now we have oxygen and ventilatory support, and oxygen to try to have an SpO2 higher than 90%. But you will see also diuretics, and in the next slides I will show you that we are proposing a new way to monitor the efficacy of diuretics, and probably we should go out from the scenario that the patient comes with acute heart failure. You just inject one dose of diuretics and you go to take care of other patients for several hours, and maybe you would come back to see this patient in the following day. Here, we will advise you to follow up very closely the patient and to come back after 2 hours to see the effect of diuretics. In the guidelines 2021, one of the important difference is that vasodilators was downgraded. This is related to two large studies, one performed by Christian Müller in Basel, one by myself and Yunadon Freund Elizabeth, published in JAMA 2 years ago now. And the two studies showed a neutral effect of vasodilators, if either given by patch for the Swiss study led by Christian Müller, or high dose IV in our trial, in Elizabeth trial. I told you diuretics, now you should really try to change the procedure in your hospital and try to follow this procedure that is recommended by ESC. What is this procedure? First is, what is the initial dose of diuretics that we are giving to those patients? The initial dose depends on whether the patient had an oral loop diuretics at home. If the patients had oral diuretics, then you give 1 to 2-fold or 2 times daily dose of oral diuretics. Then if the patients were getting 80 milligram, then you would give 80 to 160 milligram IV as the first dose. However, if the patient had no oral diuretics at home, you would start with 20 to 40 milligram IV Lasix. And this here in the red square is very, very important. After 2 hours, you should ask the nurse, whoever is taking care of the patient, after 2 hours, is to take a little bit of urine, send it to biochemistry, and you need to show that your diuretics are working. It's like vasodilator. You give vasodilators until you see blood pressure decreasing by 20 to 30 or 40%. Here, you give the diuretics, and you need to check that your diuretics are working. 2 ways. After 2 hours, sodium in the urine should be higher than 50 to 70 milliequivalent per liter. Or you can also wait for 6 hours and measure urine output over the first 6 hours, and it should be 1 liter, which corresponds to 150 milliliter per hour. And one of the two things would tell you whether diuretics works or didn't work. If it worked, perfect. You just need to wait for a few hours, and at 12 hours after admission, you repeat exactly the same initial dose and you keep going. However, if you didn't achieve those goals, if sodium in the urine is below 50 or urine output is below 100 to 150 per hour, then you will double the dose and you will repeat the same monitor. Now, giving all those treatment, oxygen, diuretics, and maybe vasodilators, what we need to do is we need to check whether this is efficient and whether the patient is improving or not. And to do this, several of our fellows did an echo in patients coming to our hospitals, and they did echo at baseline, and they did echo on the following days to see what exactly is improving. We know that the dyspnea is improving, but what else is improving in the following days? And here are signs of congestion. Here you have the echo signs of congestion, and here you have the biomarker signs of congestion. I think this paper is important because it shows that not only we should do echo in the first hours, but we should keep repeating the echoes to see whether the patient or how the patient is improved. In blue here, we have acute heart failure, and in red, we have patients admitted for dyspnea, but from non-cardiac origin. And interestingly enough, you see we are doing very good with patients because you see that the patient with acute heart failure, after a few days of treatment, you see that IVC diameter is reduced by 30%, much more than indeed we can see in non-cardiac dyspnea related to non-cardiac failure, because it's not, we are not giving even diuretics, we are not decongestion those patients. Then really in acute heart failure, we are reducing IVC diameter, we are also reducing IVC variability. Then you see how important it is to do repeated echo. But more importantly, see here the medial E over E prime, it is also improved together with the E wave. Then you see if you have fellows or you have residents, and sometimes they would ask you, but why should I repeat the echo in the following days? But here you can show this paper and show that this is a way to show that not only the patient improved dyspnea, but how the echo parameters may be improved. And here you can also see, you can also see that biomarker were improved indeed, mostly in peptide, but you see that other parameters of congestion also improved. And interestingly, now if we look on the heart, directly on the heart function, because it was unclear for me whether we are changing something because BNP you saw is decreasing, but whether by echo we can see some change in the volumes. And you see, in fact, no. We see that we change IVC diameter, but when we looked on left ventricular end diastolic volume, left atrial area and right atrial area, in fact, we couldn't see a difference. It is interesting also to see the cardiac function, and you see here that there are changes which are really interesting. Now let's jump to a form, the most severe form of acute heart failure, and this is cardiogenic shock. We published this paper to show how we should manage cardiogenic shock related to acute myocardial infarction. We said the patient should come to the cath lab. We should do an echo on the cath lab. Why? To try to eliminate mechanical complications or patients who need to go to surgery. When the cath lab or surgery is done, then the patient would go to ICU and CCU. We said that after acute myocardial infarction, 30, in some centers, even 50% of the patients coming with cardiogenic shock related to acute myocardial infarction. In fact, 50% are related to CPR, out of hospital CPR. This is an issue that we need to put in mind. And then in the ICU, we often have 4 organs to take care of: hemodynamics, respiratory distress, acute kidney injury, and also the brain. And then did the recent guidelines said on the management of cardiogenic shock. First, he said, if there is a clear hypoperfusion, then you need to measure by any means, you need to measure cardiac output. If cardiac output is reduced, then you have the right to give inotropes. However, they are not recommended routinely because of safety concern. And what is novel in the guidelines 2021 is the position of norepinephrine and epinephrine. And here, related to papers from where we participated, at least my research group participated. One is Optima CC, published in JACC, in 2018, and a very, very large, the largest meta-analysis published a few months later, where we clearly showed that norepinephrine is the vasopressor of choice in cardiogenic shock. However, we showed repeatedly in 2 papers, but in others as well, but Optima CC was great because it was the intensivists were blindly giving either norepinephrine or epinephrine, and the study was stopped because epinephrine was associated with a high incidence of harmful effect. To come back to our algorithm, in the ICU, hemodynamic instability, we said PAC catheter should be introduced if there is a right persistent shock or a right ventricular failure. This is recommendation of EC and also of the European Society of Intensive Care Medicine. A few years ago, there were 2 editorials, one saying no, one saying yes, and they said the same thing, at least for PAC. They both agree that PAC should be given, especially, as you can see here, in patients with right ventricular dysfunction. And in an editorial that tried to put the 2 positions, you can see here they said that the initial assessment should be done by echo to check whether there is hypovolemia, whether there is a cardiac dysfunction without right ventricular impairment. You see here that the PAC is not necessarily in first position. However, as I mentioned several times, when there is an impaired, a very severely impaired right ventricular dysfunction, everybody agrees that we need to put the PAC catheter. And this paper that came out the last year is a really very important paper because it shows that the problem is not to have a device. And I think this is an important paper, an important message, I would say, maybe for all your session. The problem is not the device. The problem is who is behind the device. And this paper is very important indeed. Naveen Kapoor is now the rising star of cardiogenic shock. We are doing, you may have seen the paper on respiratory medicine this year with him on how to design cardiogenic shock. And this study is very important because it shows that it depends on the parameters that you are generating and indeed how you change management with those parameters. And you see here that in patients who where we couldn't find parameters despite the Swan guns, or few parameters despite the Swan guns, the mortality remained high, and the mortality decreased only if they could find in the chart recording those 5 parameters: PP, systole, diastole, wedge, saturation, and right atrial pressure. It shows you that, in fact, it's not only putting a Swan guns that saves lives. It's when you put the Swan guns, you take all the parameters, and indeed behind you change. Since I'm short of time, I'm just confirming that in right ventricular dysfunction, we need to have echo here. As you may have seen here, we have the subhepatic veins that are dilated, right ventricle is under pressure with the cardiac constraint, the left ventricle cannot move properly. And here the treatment is norepinephrine to increase blood pressure and restore the perfusion. This was confirmed. I advise you really to read these guidelines on pulmonary embolism that came out 2 years ago from ESC, again with beautiful schemes of echo. And again, they said in right ventricular dysfunction, this is very important, do not give volume because they are already with a dilated ventricle. However, put norepinephrine immediately. Then echo, biomarkers, measure cardiac output, no excess fluid, norepinephrine as a first-line therapy. The main message is, I hope I convince you that acute heart failure with stable hemodynamics is congestion, echo is enough. Acute heart failure with unstable hemodynamics, congestion, hyperperfusion, echo first, but don't hesitate to put a PAC, measuring all the parameters and changing your therapeutic strategy. Thank you so much.